Hello and welcome to today's webinar on producing an effective progression route in primary. My name is Wendy Piccinini and I am the KS Community Outreach Manager for communities across London and the East of England, and I am your host for this session. This webinar is part of the KS Inspire series. KS Inspire is a series of resources consisting of live webinars with expert panelists discussing topical computing education matters in which the audience can get involved. Also featured are videos teaching computing concepts, podcasts, and careers inspiration webinars. During the session, please use the question window on the right-hand side of your screen to ask questions. All attendees are in listen-only mode. The top of the window has an orange rectangle which can be expanded or collapsed. If you would like to download a copy of this afternoon's presentations, they are available under the handouts section. If using social media, the hashtag for the event is hashtag KSInspire20. During the webinar, please type any questions into the question window. And there will be a break at the end of each presentation and I will bring any questions to the presenters then. Without further ado, let me introduce our panel to you. This afternoon, I am joined by Julia Briggs, Richard Smith, Rachel Vidler, and Neil Rickus. Kicking off our webinar is Julia, and Julia is an education technology advisor with Somerset Support Services for Education. Alongside her colleagues in the ELIM team, she works to support schools with online safety, technology to support all learning and the computing curriculum. Her work on a model for computational thinking is the basis of all their computing and technology work and has been used nationally and internationally. Teaching in the classroom remains her favourite thing to do. Once a teacher, always a teacher. So I'm going to hand over to Julia for our first presentation. Thanks, Julia.
Thank you, Wendy. It's great to be here tonight. I'm going to be talking through the ABC juggle when it comes to progression. So we're going to think about your progression being achievable and accessible, and that's largely in terms of the teachers, broad and balanced, and challenging and creative, and both of those in terms of the experience for learners. Achievable and accessible. We want to make sure that the progression is understandable by all the staff that are going to be using it. It needs to be inclusive, so working out how you can be sure that it's going to be appropriate for all learners is important. And you want an iterative progression. So with the progression that you may have in place, that's your check. Is it iterative? Does it give the experiences to children so they can keep coming back, revisit, reinforce? Your starting point is always the progression that works for you. So there's a lot of progressions available. Your check is that they're based on the National Curriculum document, the end of key stage statements, and always important to remember that those are the end of key stage. So possibilities, you have probably got one in place, but to be aware of possibilities. So I know the one that we use in Somerset, unfortunately now we have to work on payment basis, but it is available within the STEM resource library, but big warning here, the online safety statements are well out of date now. So just need to be aware of that, but that is available, and that's progression based on ICANN statements. Sheffield have got the computing progression, and that is available both in terms of overall key stage but year groups, and both those progressions firmly online safety is there, underpinning it all, and that reminder that online safety, class teacher responsibility, however you're teaching computing, and part of relationships education, but you're reinforcing it in all that you do in computing. So just keep that in mind and think about how you want that online safety to sit in the progression. There are various progressions within the computing at schools community resources. So I've just picked up one there. There's Philbag's Code It progression, and then there's the NCCE. At the moment, you've got a progression in experiences, but I understand there's statements that are coming that you can use to have the framework there. And again, really, really important that that's all underpinned with online safety. And in terms of SEND learners, there is a progression available that Sheffield have published. There's one linked within the Computing at Schools, and there's a progression publicly available on the website for Somerset Ealing that I work for. So having those SEND progressions, really important part of your picture. And always, always, always checking online safety underpinning all of that. I came across the juggling video when I started to put together these slides, and it is the best example I've come across of decomposition of a skill and thinking through the progression of learning that needs to happen. So from starting with that one juggling ball and all the tips, needing to be able to drop it, be aware of the checks you need to have, scaffolding to help you, and troubleshooting built within it. Fantastic example, and a really good one also to get children to do a bit of decomposition with. So thinking of that juggling, we want it, whatever we've got in place, broad and balanced. And that's in terms of the tools. Needs to be appropriate tools, but we need a variety. We don't want all our children to continually be having the same experiences. The media that children experience through that progression need to be sure it includes images, sound, filmmaking, as well as presentation to give your learners that complete experience. And in terms of that progression, you can see now why I brought in the juggling analogy. We also need to think about those in the cross-curricular context, because we want all of those learning experiences, children to understand how it sits with all the knowledge they're gaining, and that they are getting that application of the learning that's happening. So there's a few checks on the progression that you've identified for your school. And that range of programming experiences I put up here. So this is just one example. So all aspects of your progression, all aspects of your computing curriculum. Key thing is more than one. Children will benefit so much from that variety of experiences and applying their knowledge, applying their understanding with different resources and in different ways. We also want to be sure that you've got the balance. So we want to build that knowledge, understanding and skills, but so key that learners are having that opportunity to apply the knowledge. So these photos from a learning experience with Year 6s, where there'd been a breach in the firewall at the school and the children needed to learn about it so that they could support the school in making sure it didn't happen again. You can see bottom left, an expert that they video conferenced with, the knowledge they were putting together, but then they were applying it, they were using it for a purpose. And the main thing the children identified was that the teachers needed to be trained better. So that balance, building knowledge and applying knowledge. I'm just going to pause a moment for you to think on this one. What's the progression we're seeing here? So I picked this example to think about what mastery in computing might really look like for that confident learner. What could mastery mean? So looking at this, what would you say is the progression that you're seeing? And for me, working with this mixed year 3 and 4 class, the girl with the ponytail, who at the start of it was very much in control, was groups of children doing all sorts of things, and she was bringing together all the work that was happening, and her group that were responsible for that, she started by telling them all what to do and showing them and doing it for them. And then, wow, what a progression to stand to one side, not only to let them do it, but let them work through it together, but be ready to help them. So in terms of progression, something else that we're doing as we juggle this whole idea. We want the progression to be challenging and creative. So here we're thinking about avoiding that learnt helplessness, children being independent. So all the information that if you go to Phil Bagg's website to help avoid learnt helplessness is important. At the same time, we've got to balance that with the cognitive load. We need what the children are presented with to be something that they can manage, that the learning is appropriate. And in terms of being challenging and creative, we want to be sure that they're having that opportunity to design, able to apply that learning in different way, and all that Jane Waite has done about design, bringing that in, making sure that that is part of the experience for children. And part of that, thinking about that avoiding the learned helplessness, getting that appropriate cognitive load in the progression. This is the model of computational thinking that came from some master's action research that I was doing. And the reason I brought it up, Barefoot Computing have a fantastic model of the computational thinker, which I'm very proud to say when it first was established was based on some of this work that was done. But I wanted to bring this up because I think it's really, really important that the computational thinker, it is about developing the skills. The Barefoot model changed it to be approaches, but I would say it's really, really important that the learning opportunities are appropriate to developing those attitudes where children are comfortable with making mistakes and learning from them, and that perseverance, they're ready to use their imagination and they're able to be collaborative, that those attitudes are part of what we want to develop within the progression. And that appropriate learning experience is that mix of doing and thinking, planning our algorithms, doing the building of our code, the building of our programming. But that thinking and doing is part of the whole, right across the whole computing curriculum. And we're, as we do our juggling, need to work out the appropriate scaffolding, where support's needed, and where our learners, we need to make sure that they're being independent. And something that's stuck in my mind from a conference, which is probably 15, 20 years ago now, where and somebody will probably immediately remember his name, the no-tosh person, really challenged about who's doing all the learning. How often do we as teachers get everything ready and we've learned an amazing amount, but that really important that we're planning, our progression is done in a way that children are being independent and developing their learning. And the RAG model, we did quite a lot of work with Jane Waite around the ragging of designs and came up with the poster which is available within Computing at School resources. Children doing that self-assessment, so they're recognising they might not know what to do yet, as teachers, we can recognise those that might need help because of that, those that think they know what to do, that are ready to have a go, and as teachers, just keeping our eye on those, and then those that are confident, those that know how to use the resources, how to achieve the outcome they want, so that we are ready to be able to challenge them further. So we want to prepare for that ABC juggle: achievable and accessible, broad and balanced, challenging and creative, and I'm just going to throw in a D. We need to be determined if we want to get that in place in school, because we need to prepare our teachers for that. So that model of the pedagogical content knowledge that's part of the NCCE training that happens, we need to make sure that that we are confident that we know our learners, we know our subject, and the teachers have enough of repertoire, both in terms of the pedagogy but strategies, that their knowledge is confident, so that as we're doing this juggling, they've got that knowledge behind them, that confidence to apply it. Because one thing we know with progression is we always need to be flexible and adaptive. And final thought that I will leave you with is a picture that I enjoy talking about every opportunity I get, and I think I can slot it in here as part of progression as well. The idea that came from Lucas and Claxton of mountain thinking and meadow thinking. It's very easy for progression to be firmly fixed within the mountain thinking, and children, learners need that. Mountain thinking lets them build fluency. So as they develop their confidence and ideas, they'll be building up the mountain ranges so that they know if they're asked to do, this is what the challenge is. I want you to complete this problem in maths. I want you to put together a presentation. We're building up the mountain ranges so that they can have that fluency of knowing what to do immediately and follow that mountain range. They've gained the maths fact knowledge so that they can use it and apply it. But at the same time, we know we need to use the meadow thinking. We need to flatten down those mountain ranges so that we can go off in new directions to be imaginative and creative. All those times as adults when we might drop asleep and wake up and suddenly think, that's how I solve that problem. Or you might be out on a walk and you'll suddenly come back to something and see the way through. And that's the most difficult thing to achieve in classrooms, to find time to let children not complete something, to let children hit a problem and not solve it immediately, but to be able to give them the time to return to it after a break or to come back to it the next week, so that they've got that opportunity. And I've seen it happen with children. It's so exciting. They've hit a problem, particularly I've seen it where children have done a program and it's just not doing what they want and they can't necessarily debug it, and letting them go off, do something else completely, and then while they're doing something else, think of a new way of coming back to it. So within that progression, they will be building fluency, but letting them have that opportunity to use their imagination and creativity to solve problems as well. So that's my ABC of progression. Quite a lot of ideas in there, and hopefully something that wherever you are, wherever you're starting from, you might find helpful, whether it's reviewing the progression you've got in place or building that progression. So thank you very much. And I think, Wendy, you're going to let me know if there's any questions that have come in.
Thanks, Julia. That was really, really interesting. I just wrote a couple of things down really about allowing the time, allowing children time to revisit things that they've been working on. I thought that was fantastic, and really appreciated you drawing attention to the attitudes of children in computer lessons and thinking about that in terms of progression as well. So those were kind of the highlights for me of what you said. So thank you very much. And we just have a comment. I'm not sure if it's a question or not. It's from Richard, and he has put Ewan Mackintosh ?
Yes, it was Ewan Mackintosh that spoke about who's doing all the learning and encouraging teachers to let children start rather than us do all the research for them and then plan our learning experience. Of course, most of the time we know jolly well where we want children to get to, but to let them be part of that process of developing their learning experience that they need to get to the outcome we want.
So more of a child-led approach then.
Yeah, as a teacher, generally speaking, again, that's where teacher confidence in their knowledge and in the strategies they're using is important, because most of the time we absolutely have in our mind, we know the outcome, we know we've got those progression statements, but to be able to plan the learning, not all the time, because sometimes you just got to do it, but to have those opportunities for them to be able to actually think, right, this is what I need to learn. I need to start here. I need to do these things. So yeah, letting children have that opportunity to really have ownership of that learning and really challenge their independence is important.
That's great. Thank you very much. I'm going to pass over the control to Richard so he can load his presentation. And while he's doing that, I'm going to introduce him. So Richard supports schools to develop creative computing ideas that will give students lots of confidence to progress. He publishes lots of free content on his website, so do check that out. That's www.amazingict.co.uk. And he's also one of our fabulous CAS community leaders, and he leads the CAS Telford community. And Richard is going to be looking at vocabulary and in terms of progression. So I'm going to hand over to Richard now. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Just checking you can see my screen, Wendy.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Brilliant. So first of all, thanks for asking me to do this. It's quite interesting because I started as a maths teacher and then I started teaching business studies and now I'm doing computing. And across all those subjects, one thing I think is really important is developing students' vocabulary. So there's 5 slides here and you can download this, you can use it. But I just want to make some points about how important vocabulary is and how important it is your role in school to help the children to develop their vocabulary. And perhaps a few sticking points as well that, you know, it's easy for me to say, but actually that's quite tricky because a lot of the stuff that we're talking about within the computing curriculum is quite new to a lot of people and they won't necessarily have done it at college or they won't have been trained on it. So we're looking at progression of vocabulary from early years to Key Stage 2 and beyond. So slide 1 is something that we did at Apley Wood School, which is in Telford, and they were exploring the human body. And I persuaded them to buy a couple of these Ozzobots. And if you've ever used an Ozzobot, you know it will follow a black line. It can follow any color other than yellow and pink, the pale colors. So the children were first of all thinking about what they could draw, and then they were using the Ozzobot to follow the outline of, say, an arm or a hand or a foot. And during that time, they were encouraged to talk about how the Ozzobot actually worked. And the key point here for people watching this is, even though these are very young children, you need to try and use the correct technological term. So in this case, we've got a sensor. It's a color sensor underneath the Ozzobot that will actually know when it's following a line. So the point being is don't just think, oh, they're very young and we'll just use sort of woolly language. Try and get them to use the correct language. But obviously you've got to explain it very clearly, because this is quite an abstract term, and it's quite an abstract and complicated concept that something can follow a line. So Ozobots are great. I've got no vested interest in the product, but I've just found that they're very, very good. And when I work with the young children, they all sit around and I put it on my hand and we talk about what this might be and the fact that we need to look after it. So it's a bit like an egg. It's a little treasure that we have to look after. And then some of the children, when you allow them to talk, we'll talk about some of the parts within it. So they might say light, or they might say on-off switch, and slowly you're helping them to develop their language. And down the bottom of the slide, use vocabulary such as move, turn and forward, so that you've got your cross-curricular aspects, so that therefore when they're doing that in D&T or science or maths, they're used to using those terms. I think sometimes because everybody's so busy, we think of, you know, vocabulary for science, history, maths, and we need to just look at what the common terms are so that we're reinforcing that, because otherwise it's going to be so hard for the children to pick up all this vocabulary. And sometimes I hear teachers saying, oh, this is the most important vocabulary, but they forget that there's a vocabulary in all the other subjects as well. One thing I'd like to draw attention to is the Barefoot site, which Julia talked about, and there's a new thing called Barefoot Bites, and I put a hyperlink here that you'll be able to go on to. And what I like about this Barefoot material is it encourages you to do some unplugged activities, which actually is very good at the moment, because in some schools I work in, they're not allowed to actually use the actual computers or the tablets. And the example I want to give from this Barefoot Bites site is where we're talking about poems. So if you think of a poem, often in a poem there might be some repetition within verses so that the reader builds up a picture of what's going on, and rhyming between words. So what we're looking at is, can the students spot the patterns used in these poems? So straight away here I've got repetition and patterns, which are two key things that we talk about in computing, and yet we're therefore linking with English and literacy. So a quick tip there, talk to other staff about how shared vocabulary can help everyone progress. And by everyone, I mean all the children and all the staff in school, so the TAs, the teachers, so that we're using that shared vocabulary across the school. Consider how you can share key vocabulary, and I've produced a list, and I'm just going to come off this and show it you on, just minimize that for a second. I'm just going to show it you on the website. Now basically this has been created with support from Phil Bagg that Julia mentioned, but also there's some ideas in there from Too Simple and Kaz and Pete Dring, who did these brilliant posters, and they're on the Kaz site and you can just download them. And I really like it when I go into school and they've got some of these around. So what I've done is a list of terms, and I've try to define them myself in a simple way, because I notice sometimes when people get a sort of list of terms, they can be so complicated. So a coder, a person who writes computer code, I've just tried to keep it really simple. Character, this is often called a sprite. A character can be a letter or a symbol as well. And I've tried to put some stuff in linked to sort of Scratch and Scratch Junior here. So we've got condition and copyright as well, because as you know, there's the 3 strands within computing. So you've got computer science, and then you've got your information technology and your digital literacy. And often we do a lot of the top strand, but we don't do so much on the middle strand. So some terms there. So you're welcome to download that and just use it. Please share it. So I'm just going to move you on. So this is something that's based on the NCC, and there's a link here to the actual unit, and this was something I wrote last week. So I thought it might be quite nice for you to see something that I've just done. So this is meant for Key Stage 1, and what we've got is it's the introduction to a quiz. So we've got a dog and a frog, and which is the first in the alphabet, and the children first of all play it, and then they're encouraged to program this themselves. So I'm just going to go through this for those people that aren't familiar with Scratch Junior. It's all free. It's an app that works on Android or Apple. So when we click on the character, in this case, the first one in the alphabet is the dog, it's going to say, well done. The dog's going to jump up in the air and back down for 2 units of time, and then it's going to move to a new background. Now, I've done a video for this. Please don't run the video now, but it's on YouTube, so that'll help you. You can use that after half term, give the staff the video, show them the NCCE unit link, and therefore you're away with a little lesson for after the holiday. And what I would say here with the students is encourage them to predict what's going to happen. Sometimes, as Julia said, we almost give them a little bit too much help sometimes because we're worried about moving them on, or we want them to move on quickly to the next thing, or things don't work in school, or we're short of time. So try and encourage people to predict, and by predicting they're therefore going to discuss things which will help people to develop their vocabularies, because obviously if you're discussing things you're going to develop vocabulary. And then my last slide is talking about education for a connected world, and there's a brilliant sort of glossary of terms on here which starts on page 47, which I'm going to show you in a second if I've got time, Wendy. So a lot of children are interested in the word hacking, so it gives quite a nice definition of hacking here, or who hackers are. And the people that have written this have spent a lot of time coming up with the correct terminology to help staff develop their terminology. So I'm just going to minimize that and then just show you where it is. So it starts on page 47. I'm just going to move that across and just scroll down. And it splits everything that we need to do with the connected world into 8 sections for different age groups. But today I want to focus on this. So, you know, adware, they're all here, and then it just gives you a nice definition of that. So I've put all that together. Wendy mentioned my website, so it's called Amazing ICT. And if you go to the safety page, I've put all the links down here for you. So you've got Project Evolve, and then you've got the Education for a Connected World, and then you've got a little advert for Safer Internet Day, which I'm encouraging you to all sign up for. And you can actually do that. You can register your school, and you get a little certificate to say that you've registered. So thank you, Wendy. That's my little bit, and I'm ready to take any questions.
Thanks, Richard. We don't have any questions, but I am really glad that you mentioned the Education for a Connected World and the Project Evolve resources, because there's a couple of CAS community meetings that are coming up where those resources are actually being demonstrated. So if people are interested, we have a community meeting coming up on the 23rd of November, And actually, the community leader who's running that session is Neil Rickus, and he's about to speak in a little while. So I'm doing a plug for his meeting. But if anybody who is watching this webinar is interested in finding out more about Project Evolve and the free resources that are available to primary schools, then I can just highly recommend that you come along to one of those sessions. There's one in November, which is Neil's, the Hatfield community, and there's one also running in December if you can't make that meeting. And we actually have the director of Project Evolve doing a demonstration, so that's absolutely fantastic. So look out for those on the CAS community events page. Thank you so much, Richard. Just a comment, people in the chat are saying, Carol said, I used Project Evolve lessons on copyright and ownership last week, and they were fantastic. Thank you so much, Carol, for saying that, because you've just reminded me to mention the fact that they're not specifically for computing. They also cover the SRE and PSHE curriculum, and they're just fantastic because you can literally download the resource, print it out if you want to, and there's a slide deck, and there's kind of discussion questions and ready to go activities, and it's all there. There's no kind of preparation needed at all. So yeah, can't recommend those highly enough. Thanks, Richard. We're going to pass over to Rachel now. So as before, bear with me while I just change presenter. So Rachel can load her presentation, and Rachel's going to do a presentation on progression in Scratch. So I'm really looking forward to this. And just by way of introduction, Rachel is a qualified teacher with a wealth of experience in computing and using technology in the classroom. Her experience in schools led her to work as a subject matter expert for STEM learning and the National Centre for Computing. And she offers guidance and training for primary schools nationally, alongside facilitating CPD courses for the NCCE. She's also a Raspberry Pi certified teacher, Apple teacher, and Seesaw ambassador. So handing over to Rachel now. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you, Wendy. So what I'm going to talk about today, and going to kind of, it's one of those things, when we talk about progression, I was like, what's the best thing, or what's the thing that maybe teachers will kind of want? So I decided to focus on Scratch, and it's going to be a whistle-stop tour of a few things, basically how you can just make sure, certainly at Key Stage 2, you've got that progression in, because obviously computing, looking at the whole subject is massive, so I'm just trying to home in on a small part of it, essentially. So just as a quick overview of the national curriculum, which I know Richard mentioned previously, if you want a way to kind of structure in your school, it can be broken down into these key 3 strands, which, you know, I'm not the first to invent this. This has been around for a while, but it kind of makes it easier when you're looking at progression and when you're looking at sequencing of skills, that you can kind of cluster it into these 3. So the way that I work with a lot of schools and breaking it down to is computer science, information technology, and then digital literacy or online safety. So then just really briefly looking at the actual national curriculum objectives, they will then kind of fall into these categories, which, like I say, this is a handout that you can kind of take away afterwards. So just looking at your computer science objectives, they are almost a discrete teaching point and a little bit separate from your IT skills and then your digital literacy. But like Julia mentioned at the beginning, your digital literacy, your online safety should underpin everything, and your IT skills should be that broader balance, so you are using a variety of different software and things to kind of incorporate it. So it kind of looks the same at Key Stage 2. And what we're going to look at is, we're almost going to look at that second objective on the national curriculum and just how that kind of pulls back into Scratch with regards to certain concepts that you've kind of got to teach. And I do think Scratch is one of those things, I'm not saying it's the only platform to use, because I would complement it with things like code.org or Code for Life. I'd complement it at Key Stage 1, you know, with Scratch Junior or Bbots and practical stuff and a lot of the unplugged stuff, like Richard mentioned through Barefoot. It's not the only thing you can use, it's just, I'm just trying to home in on one platform and how you can ensure that you've got a bit of progression through that. So just as a breakdown, like I say, we'll leave this with you, but this is kind of how you can structure some of your teaching points. But we're going to look at the computer science objective and just for Scratch. So one thing I like to talk about just before I kind of go into the platform is mainly for me a bit of pedagogy with regards to computer science, and this is just this coding and programming objective that I always think You know, in light of the changes to the deep dive and Ofsted, they're saying that you need to have a progression of skills, which realistically we probably should have had before, but that means you've got to have some kind of understanding underpinning it. So like Julia said at the beginning, the computational thinking skills are key here to ensure that children actually understand what they're doing on coding before you put them on an abstract platform like Scratch. You know, to me, that would be my last port of call. So the way in which you can kind of put in some pedagogy, and this is just something that I've kind of worked on and developed, and I'm not saying again that it is a be all and end all, but it's quite a nice way to put in some progression within your computer science skills, is I kind of take the children on a journey of 3 levels. So we go from unplugged to concrete to abstract. So using that platform of Scratch is my last point of call when I'm doing my computer science teaching. I'm making sure that I've done the legwork with the unplugged activities, which is like your barefoot, your lessons about computers. We've done some work on concrete, which means the crossover. So when we put them on Scratch, they've got a little bit of an understanding. And I'll show you a few of those things today, you know, albeit briefly, of how you can incorporate some of those. So just breaking down those 3 steps, I guess, in the progression a little bit simpler. I would always start off with unplugged for computer science, and this basically means that you're not touching computers, you know, and in the climate we're working now, like the barefoot bite stuff that Richard mentioned, this is really prominent if some of you guys can't get access to your computer science skills, your technology such as your iPads or laptops. You can really reinforce the thinking this year and get them really well on with that. They should be practical. I always say if you come into a classroom while I'm doing one of these lessons, it's a bit like organised chaos, because there should be loads of language, tying in your vocabulary. They should be exploring and doing it in a practical nature. It should be stuff that's relatable. So in Key Stage 1, it is simply just sequencing things, you know, writing algorithms for washing your hands, brushing your teeth, that kind of stuff. There's activities out there like field bags, human crane, which is great. They do multi-link everywhere and they're writing their own algorithms, or Barefoot's crazy characters, where they're sat back to back and they're trying to give instructions. So it's really important to kind of reinforce your vocabulary, your computational thinking at this point. Then in my opinion, the missing step, I was facilitating some training today, and someone said, but how do you go from the practical to the abstract? It's all right doing all these unplugged things, which are really practical, and how do you actually get them before you go into Scratch? So in my opinion, there's just a little step here, which is this concrete step. And I'm going to show you some links to some places where you can find stuff for Scratch. This, to me, is reinforcing the computational thinking skills that you've already embedded, but introducing the vocabulary and introducing the language that they're going to be exposed with. So, you know, it's stuff that you're probably already doing without being aware. Certainly at a Key Stage 1 level, it's using those, print out those pictorial and directional cards and getting the children to act out as human B-bots. So before you even give them a B-bot, they're exposed to the pictorial language that they're going to see. They're exposed to actually how it works. They're using that in an algorithm and giving it to a person. And I do the exact same thing. I mirror it with Scratch Junior. So I'll print off all the Scratch Junior cards before I go on. I will look at what the different color codes mean. The same with Scratch. What do the blue codes mean? Can they acknowledge that they're movement? Can they acknowledge that purple are looks? Because if they can make those kind of connections before you put them on Scratch, it makes it a lot less daunting. And then realistically in this concrete step as well, you're checking that understanding of can they read code? Because if they can't read sequentially code, how are they going to be expected to write it? So I think this is a nice little step, and I will show you some links to some stuff that Phil Bagg's done, where you can pull some of these, print them off, and just have, it doesn't need to be a lesson, it can be like a 20-minute input to actually check that they've got the understanding at this concrete level. You know, we've cut out laminated cards before you're going to put them onto Scratch. And if they haven't, that's where you can pick up your misconceptions and do your legwork before they go to Scratch. And it's just that nice little barrier. Because then, like I say, the last step to me should be that abstract stuff. And although I'm going to talk about Scratch today, just remember this isn't everyone. You know, I'm not just saying this is a platform that you have to use. There are loads of other stuff out there. I've just decided to do it in this one element. And what you'll find is a lot of this will be transferable to different platforms anyway. So looking at the sequencing, just before I start, one thing I want to say is, and I know that Richard mentioned it, so go and check out his videos, which he's done on this. Before you move on to Scratch, and I'm talking Key Stage 2, Scratch Junior is a brilliant application for Key Stage 1. The NCCE units on the Teach Computing curriculum, which is out there, they do 2 units. They do a program in A and a program in B. And on both year 1 and 2, the B unit uses Scratch Junior, which is really, really good. So I have used this in school. I've used this in my year 2s. When they come over to year 3, I just found that it was so succinct. They just knew stuff because they knew the blue was looks. They knew that they needed this green event command. We'd worked on the fact that you need an event command for a code to run. So when we came onto Scratch, there was just so many transferable skills that really picked it up. So if you can use this and embed this in your practice at Key Stage 1, it's going to make your life a lot simpler when they go to Scratch. It will just make it less daunting. And there are some schools, there are some cool stuff you can do with Scratch Junior. I've made a rocket game where you look at event commands. You could do that in year 3 as a crossover if you wanted. So you could bring it into the year 3 curriculum, or if you've got a mixed year group, you could kind of use it there. So going on to Scratch then. And this is the one variable that I'm going to focus on. And I've written lots of skills progression documents for schools, and it's kind of breaking down the national curriculum that in all essence is a bit rubbish. It doesn't give you a lot of guidance, should I say. You know, you're talking that there's 3 objectives for computer science to meet from year 4 to year 6, or year 3 to year 6, sorry. So across all key stage 2, how are you going to make sure you've got progression there? So this second statement on the national curriculum is one that I say lends itself really well to how you're going to structure your teaching. And the way in which I would organise it personally, and again this is just advice, is to break down a skill for each year group. So each year group really masters that skill, and then they build on progressively with what they're going to learn the next year. So for example, I would teach repetition in year 3, selection in year 4, variables in year 5, and then inputs and outputs in year 6. And I obviously have year 6 as a bit of an application year as well, so they can kind of check their understanding. So this is an option. I'm not saying it's the only option, but it's a nice way to make sure that you've got that progression throughout Scratch there. And if you look at the documents, this is taken from something that the NCCE shared. You know, you can kind of see then that you've got your sequence at Key Stage 1, building obviously into Key Stage 2, and these skills can build progressively. Okay, you don't have to teach it this way. It's just a nice way to ensure that you are actually breaking down the skills. And what I think is if you master a skill in each year group, it really has that understanding rather than trying to dig into everything and kind of handling it in a little chunk. Embed it, learn it, and build on it the next year. So what I'm going to do is just take you really quickly through each of these skills, what they look like in Scratch, some links to some concrete stuff, and then some links to some resources right at the end. So when I plan a unit of work, this is roughly what I kind of look at. I start with some unplugged stuff, which hasn't necessarily got to do anything with the skills that I'm teaching. That would already be done. I do a concrete lesson for at least 20 minutes, and I'll show you some of those for each skill. That's using the practical codes, printing them off, understanding the coding blocks, understanding the concept that you're using before I'm going to put them on Scratch. And then when I put them on Scratch, I normally do twofold. I do a lesson or 2 of discrete teaching. So what is the skill that I want them to learn? And then I do some reinforcement and application sessions, which is the fun stuff where they get to make games and apply what they've learned. Okay, I feel like if you just use games, and I'll show you some at the end, where they just copy code, I'd question if they've got the understanding, you know, but I do the discrete teaching first, and then I put them on something like that. So I'm just going to go through each skill that I've mentioned on the curriculum, what's outlined on the curriculum, and talk through what that might look like. The first one, which isn't the first one there, which is sequence. Okay, so sequence is a specific order in which instructions need to go in. And what you'll see there is just an example of this as an algorithm on Scratch, just a conversation kind of bit. So that's what it looks like in Scratch. Now, the concrete kind of lesson that I said I was on about before, this is a link to where you'll find it. So on the handout, you'll find this on here. That's to Phil Bagg's Code IT website. He's been mentioned before. He's great. I'm not pretending that I've made these up. But what I would do is print some of these sheets and get children to read through this code. So do they understand what they're going to do? Can they actually act it out? So can they wave, say beep, jump, say sit, and bow? And again, it's little things that they'll start to acknowledge that blue is movement, purple is looks, and can they actually read code in a sequential order? So if they kind of crumble at this concrete step, you can do some intervention before you then put them onto Scratch. Just as a couple of examples, again, my discrete teaching. So I would look at a couple of lessons where they're going to use sequence. A couple of nice ones that are out there is like a knock knock joke where they're going to have to look at pause and making sure that that wait command actually interlines within the next character. So they're programming 2 sprites, but making sure they've got it works in sequence, so they've got the right amount of pause. You could do this as a storytelling unit. I normally do it as a conversation unit and link it to something in topics. So I might put in some characters from history or some characters from a fairy tale that I'm doing and make them have a conversation, because all I'm wanting them to do is check that they can sequence instructions or sequence that algorithm. So that'll be my first lesson or first thing to do in year 3. The next thing that I kind of hit, and again, it doesn't have to be year 3, but the next thing in order for me would then be to teach repetition. So repetition is where you're using this loop or repetition block to avoid yourself from having a really long algorithm. So if you want something to move forward, rather than saying move forward, move forward, move forward, you put it in a loop block and you can kind of cut it down. So you're starting to think about your logic and your sequence. Again, all those computational things that were mentioned by previous speakers in Scratch. And again, just going through the same process, my concrete coding examples, field bag has done some, I would print these off. They are all practical. They've got nothing to do with Scratch apart from they're the same code and same color, getting the children to practically act them out, getting the children to create some of their own. You can print some of these on white and laminate them so they're nice wipe on, wipe off with whiteboard pens, which then they can actually go and use themselves. Discrete teaching, I'd make sure I do a lesson or two focusing on it. The one that you will have seen out there, which is really simple, that's just taken from a lesson I've taught, is shape building. So getting them to cut down rather than move 200, turn 90, move 200, turn 90, move 200, turn 90. We start to introduce like repetition. They can then start to look at pattern recognition. So if they understand that's how they make a square, can they use that generalization and put that into a triangle? Can they make a hexagon? So can they transfer and look for patterns, which again is one of those computational thinking skills. Or another one-off lesson, I might do dance things. So I might get them to put in a sprite, look at the different costumes that it has and get it to change. Again, I'm just trying to get them to understand what repetition is. So it's a one-off or two lessons teaching that. Moving on to the next group, year 4, I would look at events. Although this isn't specifically on the curriculum, it's just worth pointing out. It's just about controls. So if you're going to use your up and down arrows and get them to really understand the grid and your coordinates to make sure that then they can use this and apply this in games. So I normally do a one-off lesson on this. Like I said, it's not in the curriculum, but they need to kind of understand it to move on. Then in year 4, the next thing on the curriculum is selection. So again, you're looking at your if statement, this cause and effect or condition and action. So if I'm touching something, then I go back to the start. So this would be my next point of call. I would look at this in a concrete way again, and here is the link. Cannot stress enough, I love these cards. Print them off, get the children to act them out. You are exposing them to the code before you ask them to create it. You're allowing them to read code, but in a practical way, which isn't daunting, because they will understand that if you touch your shoulder, then something is going to happen. But you're just putting in those mini concrete steps before you put them on an abstract platform to give them a little bit more understanding. And then again, discrete teaching. I normally just use 2 for this. I'd normally even make a quiz, which you can just see a little snippet there, that if the answer is right, then say well done, otherwise say try again. Or I sometimes use it in games. There's a lot of racing car games, and you'll see the other snippet on your screen now is just that if you're touching the grass, you go back to the start or something like that. You can do it, there's a boat race game on Code Club as well, that if it touches the line of the maze, then you go back to the start. So those are the 2 applications normally that I use for the if statement, because then we're starting to build games as well, which is quite nice. And the last kind of the teaching point is variables. So variables are like whiteboards. That's what a lot of people describe them as. It's like a box that a computer stores data in. The data can be anything, number, text, or stuff like that, and then it changes, which is why it's a variable. Again, concrete coding, can they read it out? So there's just a few examples like this of setting a name, and then they're having to use that name and input it. So they should say then, don't do that, Marge. So they should understand that if they can read the code, that's what they're going to replace. And there's some other ones like this, which looks about time and changing, which is really nice. So they're going to set the time to 4. Can then read that and say that they're going to repeat and do it 4 times. So this concrete step again, just checking that they understand it, because if they don't understand here, for argument's sake, where it says change times by -2, then you're not going to get them to make a timer. You're not going to be able to put them on Scratch and have that understanding. So it's just a really nice little step to check the misconceptions. And then basically in my discrete teaching, I only ever really use variables for 2 things. I normally keep a score. So again, building progressively. Here's our if or our selection from year 4 when we made a quiz. Year 5, we're just putting the score in. Okay, so we're adding that variable on top. I either use it for a score or I use it for a countdown timer. There are loads more options out there. Richard is amazing at Scratch, he will know loads more, but those are the 2 that I normally teach. So yeah, so with regards to my discrete teaching, I obviously have developed lessons around these, and I've given you a bit of advice if you want to go away and kind of develop that. But there is also the Teach Computing curriculum, which is out there now. And what you'll see here is it follows a very similar thing to what I'm saying with regards to how to structure your progression. So in year 3, they do sequence and events, year 4, repetition, year 5, selection, year 6, programming. So don't feel like you've got to go and make all these units. These units are done, 6 lessons per unit. You've almost already got your discrete teaching there done for you. Okay, and like I say, the difference between mine and the NCCEs, and what I kind of have developed in the NCCEs, is nothing, just different year groups. You'll see it's the same option. Repetition, selection, variables, inputs and outputs, and then repetition, selection, variables, inputs and outputs. Okay, so that's there. So then lastly, before I stop talking, because I'm conscious of time, with regards to application, I put on there my unit. I would do unplugged, concrete, discrete. I would always do application if you can fit it in a lesson or two, get them to make something fun. And the best places to find these, there are these scratch cards, which you can download for free. They look like this. It's a unit of 6 or 7 things, and on the back, so one half of the card tells you what you're doing, on the back shows you what it looks like. So there are different ones for all of these, and on my presentation what I've done is I've just mapped them against those key skills that I said, and then obviously put like a guidance year group. So obviously the animated name and animated character hit sequence and a repetition, so I might teach them in year 3. There's some that hit variables and selection, so it's just a bit of a guidance. So actually, if you've done your teaching, we've learned how to do repetition, get them make a chase game, you know, and you know that it hits it in here. Yes, it will expose them to things they haven't been faced with, but the cards are pretty self-explanatory that they can work through. And it's the same kind of thing as well for Code Club units. Okay, the Code Club modules are brilliant. I use these in school and the kids really like them. They are game-based, they are topic-based, they are really fun. So I normally hit module 1, which is these ones. The Ghostbusters game is really nice. I make a chat bot where I'll talk back to you, paint box boat race. Your teachers can pick these up and literally follow the instructions, which I said is brilliant, but do it after the discrete teaching, and especially with the Teach Computing website now and resources, there is that discrete teaching there. I think if you just do this, you haven't got certainty that you're really building the skills, but after you've taught the skills, these are brilliant. And again, I'll leave you just with this cutout which shows you which skill is being hit in each project, and then just map them out to the progression of your skills that you're teaching. So for me, it's just making sure for Scratch, it is brilliant. It is an overwhelming platform. Same with the national curriculum to some extent. It's just thinking about those key skills of sequencing, repetition, selection, and variables, and making sure your nice progression and easy progression for computer science is picking a year group to master those skills, and in my opinion, and then learn it. So appreciate that's a lot. What this webinar is a lot you've got to hear from 4 of us, but you've got the handout to kind of take away, and everything is on there with the links. So hopefully that's useful just for a little bit of progression, like I say, into how you can kind of teach Scratch.
Thank you. We haven't got any questions, but just a reminder really to people that you are able to download the presentations on the handouts section. So please do that. I was conscious we had a little bit of slight delay on some of the sounds occasionally when you were talking, Rachel, so definitely encourage people to download your presentation, and there was lots of advice on your slides anyway. They were nice and detailed. So yeah, Richard says that was great, Rachel, thank you. So yeah, and just it's nice to hear people's comments. Thank you. Jonathan said he enjoyed it. Thank you very much. And Wendy, not me, another Wendy, said I really like the guidance on using the scratch cards. So I think people found that really, really useful. So thank you so much for giving us a lot of information and a lot of food for thought. Okay, last but by no means least is Neil Rickus. So we're going to hand over to Neil now. Neil's kind of going to bring us back to more current times, I suppose, and is going to give a presentation on the recovery curriculum and developing your curriculum that you're doing with the current situation of COVID and the challenges that teachers are facing right now. So this is going to be an interesting presentation to kind of finish up with. And just to say that Neil is a senior lecturer in computing education at the University of Hertfordshire. He's a member of the Centre for STEM Education. And in addition to this, he is the computing tutor on the primary PGC course at Brunel University, London, and an external examiner for Roehampton University. He also undertakes work independently, including running computing workshops for children, as a primary education specialist for the BCS, and as an NCCE resource developer for Raspberry Pi Foundation. And he is also one of our fantastic CAS community leaders, and he leads the Hatfield community. So I'm going to hand over to Neil now. Thank you.
Cheers, thanks Wendy. I'll just check you see my screen all right?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Good stuff. So thank you. You've got the graveyard shift, so I'll try not to keep you too long. We're going to be talking specifically about the recovery curriculum and how that might look in your school. Now, a lot of our children over the period of lockdown, or perhaps during a temporary time away from school, might have experienced some loss, and this could be along the lines you can see on the screen at the minute. So it might be around friendship, perhaps the routines that they're used to, and linked to that the structure of the day, and possibly the freedoms of where they can go or the opportunities that they missed out on, such as after school clubs, for example. And this recovery curriculum stuff helps the children get back to life in school, along with recognizing some of the experiences they've actually had. Now, Carpenter's team wrote this blog post on evidence for learning around the summer and outlined that actually the fact that there's some head teachers perhaps saying things around children are going to be so far behind academically, we really need to help them catch up, that perhaps they're missing the point that children really need a chance to reflect on what's happened. They need to remember how to interact with their peers and actually what it's like to be in school before they can start learning new stuff properly again. And the article outlined 5 different levers or 5 areas that need to be considered. I'll just go through them briefly. So with each of the relationships that children have, that might be with their peers, it might be with other members of the school community, including their teacher, but also teaching assistants, lunchtime supervisors, and so on and so forth. And linked to that, it could be that they actually need to reflect on what's happened in their community during that time. And some of them might have actually still been at school or been away from school for a period of time, and what that meant to them and what it was like. Related to all of this, it's important that what is being done within the school is shared outside the classroom, and also the approaches used explained and justified. And in addition to the content being presented, also students need to have time spent with them, helping them develop those skills to actually help them learn. And then finally, actual space and time to do that. So it does seem like a lot of things, but just one other part to perhaps link into all this is how it perhaps gives us an opportunity to consider the diverse range of children that are actually in our schools, to talk about some of the similarities and also differences in their experiences when away from school. And also for those 5 different leaders, some pupils might need to spend longer on certain aspects or have different approaches used. And just one thing while I'm on the topic of diversity inclusion, Computer Schools has the #include working group, which has got loads of resources, particularly for use in lessons, to look at how computing can be promoted to a diverse, inclusive range of pupils. So we're here talking computing today, and the computing curriculum actually gives us a large number of opportunities to look at these 5 levers. And things you might consider here are some of the pedagogical approaches, the way we teach stuff, and also the topics we study with pupils and the tasks and activities within those topics. And also we might be able to link some of our work to things that are going on in the community, and perhaps when we're producing creative content, actually that relates to the things that people see going on around them. And then finally, to think about the pupils actually in our school. So I've put forward a few suggestions on how we might address each of these areas. This list is by no means exhaustive, and I'm sure if we're having a bit more of a to and fro today, we could pick some of these apart, and they might not all be appropriate for your setting. But with regards to relationships, paired programming can allow children to work together effectively by having different roles. So perhaps one of them has time with the input devices while the other one works from the plan and discusses what they should include in their program, and then you swap around after a period of time. Or having collaborative tasks, perhaps using some of the collaborative tools out there, such as Google Suite of applications, can allow children to work together as well. And Also, it allows us to have an opportunity to discuss appropriate online behaviour and the relationships we have in the digital world as well. With regards to the community, we can look at how technology has actually been used during the pandemic, and that might be both positive and negative, and also to perhaps reflect on how pupils have worked if they don't have access to technology as well. The digital devices in schools give us a good opportunity to undertake speaking and listening activities, and children actually listen and see themselves, and perhaps linked to that we could produce content based on positive messages about the things that have happened in our community. As I mentioned when first introducing these levers, we do need to document what is happening in school and helping identify to parents what content we're covering, perhaps what was missed, and it may be that perhaps you want to examine less content but in more depth. I know quite a few of the presenters this evening have already mentioned the importance of just not racing through stuff and taking our time with the things we're looking at with regards to computing. For the final two parts, the metacognition, the skill of learning as it were, we can look at how we actually learn computing, the routines would be in the classroom or how we actually access a device, and also thinking about our acceptable use policies and online safety as well. We might also reflect on how perhaps the children have overcome lots of challenges, such as when learning at home or when learning independently, and link that to role models in computing such as Alan Turing, and also finally letting children have a say in their learning as well. And last thing here is to give them that space. It might be perhaps we have some open-ended tasks where children get to share their experiences, and also linking that really rich curriculum to some engaging topics. Now, I'm conscious I've gone through that pretty quickly. There's a lot to digest there. So within the handout, the link to the original article is included within that. Now, what I've included here with regards to the recovery curriculum is a small part of a number of CAS community meetings that are going to be coming up over the next few terms, starting from next half term, where we actually look at developing a primary computing curriculum in more depth. And there's two sessions out there. The first focusing on the content of your curriculum and how you're covering each area, and in particular the progression within there and the various endpoints, so where you want the children to get to by the time they finish year 6. And then the second one, that's the more topical of the two, focusing on the recovery curriculum, remote learning, and how you might adapt your teaching to be online. And all those will appear on the CAS events page. Cool, so that's it. I think I managed to make up a bit of the time you'd be pleased to know. Wendy, I'll say contact details on the screen if you need them, and hopefully that was useful.
Yeah, that was brilliant, thank you. Yes, so just as Neil has said, we do have that resource available. Do ask your CAS community leader about putting on those sessions if you're particularly interested. Just some more positive comments really in the chat saying, Wendy says she feels really reassured by what she's heard this evening and says thank you very much. So yeah, a lot of people just really benefiting from tonight's session. So just to say a massive thank you. Carol's put, thank you, great session tonight. I've learned a lot. Yeah, I completely agree with you, Carol. And I think it's really good to be able to download the presentations and digest some of that information at a slightly slower pace. But there was certainly a lot of really useful top tips and things mentioned this evening. I don't know if we can bring everyone back who's on the panel, because oh, there we go. Almost everyone. We haven't got Julia, but Yeah, just wanted to end, oh, there we go, brilliant. Just wanted to end by saying a massive thank you to everybody who has joined the webinar this afternoon. I know it's just before half term for some of you, so well done. You've nearly made it to the end of the first half term, but thank you so much for giving up just over an hour of your time and joining us. And thank you so much to Julia, to Richard, to Rachel and to Neil for presenting. And just to encourage people, please share your personal highlights on social media and the CAS website, because we like to hear great feedback from all of you. There's some more comments coming in. Even now, Linda's saying thank you, everyone. At the end of this webinar, a short survey will appear on your screen, and we would be really grateful if you take just a minute to complete the survey. We hope to see you at the next session of the CAS Inspire series, and the next one that's coming up is on Tuesday, the 3rd of November, and that is an EYFS special. So please let your colleagues, if they work in the early years, know about that. And the session is entitled The Foundations of Computing, Play, Exploration and Thinking. So I'm really looking forward to that session. And please continue to spread the word about CAS Inspire. Thank you so much for joining, and we hope to see you next time. Goodbye.